All right, guys. So I'm here with Chad Anderson of Cymbalholic fame and of just being an awesome artist. And you're into a lot of different things. And we've known each other for kind of like tangentially for years. Connections with guys like Jeff Clapp and whatnot. This is our first time actually like speaking on a video, which is
Right.
awesome. So first off, how you doing? What's up?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on, Tim. Man, it's busy. I mean, I teach at a university here, and I'm not in music, so I'm in this other area, which is like this other life. So it's all consuming, but it's the best gig I've ever had. Because you
Mm,
you work with young energy, man, and their ideas are always so fresh, and all I do is just guide them. Man, I'm just like kind of like a uh, I try to clear the path
yeah.
and lead them down the way. But yeah, it just keeps me really busy, and that's mostly what I've been up to. Is
Cool.
that
Yeah. I
ready for
love it.
summer already? Like when is that?
Yeah. It just ended. When's the next one?
Yeah,
Yeah. And so you ran the Cymbalholic forum
yeah.
back in the day. What years did you do that?
That was from well, we started it in I think it was either June or July of 2001. And that went all the way up until I believe I closed the doors around May of 2019, I believe it
Okay.
was.
Yeah.
And it would have kept going. I just, a quick short version is I didn't, I think around 2010 is when I left my career at the time. And I was gigging a lot. My son was 2 years old, and I started a new career, and that career pulled me away a lot. I just didn't have the time to moderate and handle all of the duties for that forum. And luckily we had a few members who volunteered to not take it over, but to just keep the boat
Mm,
floating. And so of course we all owe it to them for keeping the doors open from 2010 up to
mm.
until 2019. And even then, to think about, that's like a 9-year stretch where someone is just sort of keeping the boat going, and then they can't do it after that. And after that point, it was just there was a lot of stuff in the air. A lot of things were changing. Social media was at that point was well deep into its thing. So it's not that it wasn't needed, it's just none of us, there wasn't anybody at the time to really keep it going. And
Mm.
my whole thing is some of the integrity of it, which was maintaining the kind of level of community that we had. And that doesn't mean we've always had a great community. That you're part
Yeah.
of it. You've been a part of it, and it's just there's just a lot of personalities to kind of
Yes.
manage for a forum. And
Right.
anyway, it was just a lot. So we had to, unfortunately, we had to close the doors on it. It really
Yeah.
sucked.
Yeah, there
You
was,
know,
I mean, the information shared there, it's just, it was an incredible thing, really incredible. Like the amount of knowledge that was shared. And I think a lot of the guys like me and, the guys I would consider myself like newer into all of this
yeah,
stuff. I mean, my business is, well, my business will hit a decade next year, which is
that's
weird. Like, feels like
that's
I just
crazy,
started. Um,
incredible, man.
but still, like
Congratulations.
thanks. Yeah, I still feel like I'm in the early stages of this, and there's
Sure.
been many people that have paved the way before me, and like I kind of have a credit, the Cymbalholic forum and the people involved there as like that kind of was what built up to, this kind of explosion that we saw, sort of like 2015 to 2020, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
zone was like an explosion of people realizing, oh, we can do this ourselves, we can learn how to make the instrument. And then now, like in 2024, we have many more people that have started as well. And so it's like
Yeah.
it's the industry's kind of blowing up, and in a lot of ways, like we can give credit to the forum and the people on the forum that kind of helped keep the information alive and sharing the information, because it wasn't really being shared anywhere else.
Yeah, which always amazed me because even when we were in our peak years, I always say around 2004 and 2005 were really peak years on the site, on the forums. And it was kind of before one of our first big crashes where we lost. I mean, you have that amount of traffic and data coming in, and that information that's stored, and it's just on a somewhat fragile platform. It's not
Mm,
really, it was meant to just be, this is, I mean, again, pre um, social media kind of things, and so the platform could only handle what it could handle, and when it crashed, we lost a lot of stuff. And then, of course, it was brought back. I mean, the community is not going to change. The community just
Yeah.
rehash stuff, and I think um, a lot of the guys that I was thinking about those years you're talking about, where there was an escalation in the sort of independent cymbal smith kind of movement, and really before that, I mean, even before Cymbalholic and before, I mean, I the documentation probably just wasn't. It's not documentation. The way to document the things with the speed that we had, even in 2001, wasn't there in what in the 80s, or
Mhm.
70s, or even before that. However long, there've been people, I'm sure, doing this for a very long time, right? It's just
Right,
that
right, right.
we haven't had that kind of documentation or a way to collect it. And um, I'm just thankful. And things happen, man. It's like that Cymbalholic happened when it did, because we're talking about guys like Mike Skeba and Roberto Spizzichino, and these guys that were in kind of a timeline. In a way, they were early on, right? So Roberto is the guy who, to me, was always this mystery, like
Mm.
I only heard him talked about by uh, certain drummers who were kind of in the know, and from New York and from different places where I would travel, and they would always talk about his cymbals, and it was like this mysterious being out there who, like, what makes they that still happens. And
Yeah.
it was always like this thing, like, we got to find out who this. He's in the symbol book, like there was this little thing in the symbol book, right, which was the
Yeah.
Bible. You flip through that thing,
Yeah.
oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And you get back to the back, and there's that picture of him, and it's like, oh, what the whole chapter. And anyway, I could spiel on and on about that, and then also how I ended up connecting with him, which was a whole thing.
Mm.
And also tied into the beginnings of Cymbalholic, because that was really wild to go over there, spend about 3 days with him, and we didn't have it's so ridiculous. We didn't
Wow.
have, like, even just like a simple phone that would record video. It was like, I feel like it was a million years ago, and you're
Yeah.
just there, and you're trying to send messages back, like parent
Yeah.
like a pigeon or something, to send it back with a little note
Yeah.
and ramble it.
Right.
Roberto says that you
Yeah.
know the secret process is
Yeah.
but it was really, I mean, it was certainly special, man. But it was cool to have the community and post remotely and have people, you could just everybody was on the other end, like, waiting for the information. And then uh and then Mike Skeba came along, and we can talk about Mike, surely. But
Yeah.
um that changed a whole, like, the whole pivot of the community and the site, the kind of needs for it even really changed when Mike Skiba stepped in.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of like a little bit of the catalyst for why we're talking, is because
Yeah.
Adam Nywood, he's New York based, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, in the area. I mean, I
Yeah.
I don't think he's not right near the city now, but I know he's up in that northeast area for
Yeah.
sure.
And he's a saxophonist and a
Mhm.
drummer, and
Incredible in both.
incredible with both. Yeah, he sent me an
Monster.
album. So this is, I admit, like, I hadn't heard of him before he ordered a modification of mine, or I think it was like he might have reached out about something. And so he just like, hey, I got an album I want to send you. And so he sends me an album, and it's him with Jack D. Jeanette on drums,
Yep,
like
that's
his
right.
album with Jack D. I was like, okay, I need to educate myself on this guy's work.
Yeah, man,
But
great guy.
he reached out and he said, I've got a very interesting set of symbols. I want to send them to you. And he proceeds to describe that they belong to Mike Skeba, and
Mhm.
they were his symbols that he had been making. They were in process. And as we both know, I don't know how many people know this, but he's no longer with us. Mike is
Right.
passed. So um, he didn't get to finish them, and Mike's wife had given them to Adam. And so Adam had them just kind of sitting around, and because they're in process blanks, they're just really heavy Turk style set of hi-hats. And he was like, I just been looking for someone to finish these, and so I could have this set of, like, finished. Mike Skeba started, and then me, I'm gonna be the one that finishes them. So I that was kind of again, I keep using the word catalyst, but a catalyst for me to get back into the world of Mike Skeba, because I've
Right.
researched all the guys that came before me as much as I can, and you research Mike Skeba, and instantly it's like the connection between him and the Cymbalholic forum is like so intertwined, intermeshed, and he was such an important voice on that forum. And unfortunately, because we can't go back and see, the stuff that he posted, it's a lot of it. I've been able to catch little things that he wrote online here and there, kind of in random places, but he was apparently extremely active in the earlier days,
Yeah.
sharing his knowledge, sharing process, advice and techniques and all that kind of stuff. So could you just share a little bit about, like, yeah, a little bit about his relationship, your interaction with him, his interaction with the forum?
Yeah, sure, man. You're right. I mean, so I was looking back, not I wish I could actually look back, but I was thinking back about when he kind of I mean, it was really early because it wasn't right like when we opened the doors, of the site. It was within that first year though. He reached out, I think he posted a few times like anybody else would, like this is, and for those who may be listening or watching or whatever, and don't know, I mean, I feel like I'm old enough I have to say this now, but it was an internet forum. It was just, I mean, we
Mhm.
didn't have these other platforms, and it was the place where everybody would post questions and information and respond and do all that kind of stuff. Like, it's just a giant, huge chat system, basically. In fact, the first version of the site or the forums was a single threaded. Imagine that.
Wow.
Like a single threaded platform, and I mean, this is a longer story, but the first night we launched it and we thought, oh, this would be a cool idea. And we wake up the next day and it's like, it's like just hundreds like pages, like you scroll and scroll, like, oh my God, what we got to know, we got to change this like now.
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
like like right now we have to change this. There's a bunch of weird symbol people out there. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're not alone, dude. No, but when Mike came on board, I think he made a few posts, and then I received like a private message from him. And the short version of that is I could tell right away. I didn't know who he was. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, this is the Mike Skeba. I didn't know. He just was like this guy, and he the way that he even wrote his message. I mean, it was extremely thorough. It was very pointed. Um, you know, as much as you can kind of read in on someone's writing, it just he was
Right.
very like very direct, matter of fact, and he was very serious about his interest in symbols and symbol making. He explained what he does, and as I'm reading this again, Tim, it's like within the context of there isn't a platform or at that time documentation that's strong about people out there who do this outside of someone like a Roberto or
Yeah.
someone that who would do this. um, my eyes are like, I'm like this going, whoa, whoa, wait, there's someone stateside who is doing this kind of research, and symbol making and working with metals and working with doing all this stuff. And he said, more or less, I'd like to share some of this journey I'm on and some of my research with the community, because it's really nice to find a kind of a home base of people who seem like they might be interested in this. And if they're not, that's fine. I'll just cease to post this stuff.
Yeah.
And he was asking like permission to do it. And I'm thinking, uh, what, are you kidding me? Like,
Please do it.
please, please do that. And so he did. And so he did it, with a kind of a formal introduction. And because the community, communities being communities, they it was really tight knit. And always, I mean, a lot of people didn't like it. By the way, again, a side note is
Hmm.
there were a lot of people who were, some of the old heads there were kind of rough, and they would sort of run folks off. And I was trying to moderate all of that and keep people
Yeah.
in check, and it's just bonkers. But when Mike stepped in, he just had such a quiet, I don't want to say authority. He just was so sure of what he was doing and how he said it. No one second guessed who's this person coming in talking all this stuff, and he and he also never approached it like, hey, I'm some sort of expert and I know everything. He was just a real, like, quietly humble but direct person about his own research and where he was coming from, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was always really clear to everyone what his background was, kind of what he did for work, what when he made, you know, like, this was stuff that he never, I don't think he ever called it or thought of it as like a hobby. He didn't approach things that way. He was very when he went in, like, he
Yeah.
was very serious about it. So you know, it wasn't long until the information was starting to pile up, and we are scrambling around thinking, God, wait, we need to, we need like a whole section just for Mike. And I think we did that. We made like a, if I remember right, we had like a, you could divide a forum up into
Hmm.
like categorical
Yeah.
hierarchy, you know, and so we gave him like a section, and he posted a lot of stuff there. And I think eventually that's where, you know, much later, several years later, is where all of the infamous writings were kind of stored. That, thank God, somebody collected, because we lost. Again, we had another crash and lost a lot of it,
Yeah.
and I'm jumping all around on the timeline. But one thing that he did, though, that started and kickstarted a lot of this stuff, Tim, was that he uh, I don't know, I guess it was after the first year of the site, he I was telling Dave Collingwood about this. We were kind of laughing because this was such a big thing then, but he stepped in and said, hey, every new year, I want to get my wife to photograph, you know, because I didn't really do video. No, video wasn't like in the picture really then, but he
Yeah.
was like, well, photograph step by step me modifying a cymbal and talking about the process of it, you know, what the changes are. We'll document the sound of it as it changes over the period of that first week, starting on the new year every year. And I'll donate it to the site. We'll put it up for auction. All the proceeds go back to the site, and it's just my way of thanking you guys for helping. And I was, you know, that was like massive, because again, you have to remember there wasn't documentation of anybody doing that stuff like that on a
Yeah.
that I knew of. I mean, looking back, I'm saying this. I don't remember anywhere else at that time anybody was showing this stuff. And so
Yeah.
when he sat down to do it, you know, we would get these. I was up at, you know, the turn of the new year, waiting for the, here come the emails, and then here are all the photographs coming in, and like,
Wow.
and very. This is the thing about Mike. Very, very, very specific. Like, it'd be one photo of him like hammering in a certain place with like a digital circle, like from Photoshop, of like, here's the spot on the cymbal where I'm doing this and I'm working out this
Wow.
way. And we're going like, you know, we've never seen anything like this before. I'm like, what in the world? And then there'd be a sound file of it, like at this stage of the hammering, and
Mm.
you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh
It's like all the
yeah.
stages, it has to rest. We didn't know anything about that stuff. And you know, and let me back up and say too, you know, people like, let's say, Paul Francis, you know, who was at Zildjian at the time, was also a member of the forum. And you know, I don't know about then, maybe he was. I know he definitely was later. And so I know he was aware of what Mike was doing. And of course, you have people like that who work at the cymbal companies who had the experience.
Yeah.
And so it was very interesting sometimes to hear little burbles from that universe, as the attention is kind of looking at someone like Mike Skeba, and they're, I don't, you know, I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth, and they never said to me like, "Hey, you got to tell this guy to start." In fact,
Yeah.
as you know, someone like Paul Francis is just as curious and as interested, and is far more knowledgeable than most of any of us on any of these matters.
Yeah.
But he was always been, that's a whole separate episode. But you don't have to be. He's welcoming of that kind of information and exchange. And
Yeah.
I should
He
back up.
is really quick. What's weird is to get a text from Paul Francis and he's like, "Hey, can I ask your advice on something?" I'm like,
Yeah,
"Mine? What?
yeah, yeah.
Why?"
Sure, Paul. Whatever you
I will
say.
give you my knowledge, Paul.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Use the right end of the hammer, not the
Yeah.
other side, Paul.
Yeah.
No, but the, you know, and it was also funny too, because Roberto Spizzichino was a member of the forum, and I don't think people knew that. He did post a couple of times, and I think quickly realized that that was not a
He didn't like it.
he didn't like that, you know. Well,
Yeah.
he was worried about his own life and things, you know.
Yeah.
He did things on his time, and I get that. That makes a lot of sense, but
Yeah. Well, and two with that, like, there is like, and I don't put any judgment on either of the methods I'm about to talk about, but there is
Yeah.
like one school of thought that's like, keep this
Oh yeah.
information, like keep it secret. Like if you've worked super hard to develop the skill, there's some people that don't want to just share it with everyone. And so
Right.
I've heard that there's like a little bit of like some differences in opinions between Roberto and Mike, and kind of like,
Oh
why
yeah.
is Mike sharing all this stuff? Like this stuff should be kept kind of like, kept safe in a way, maybe.
Well, Roberto, when I visited him, you know, it was interesting to me and very surreal to walk into his back room where his office was in the, I say office, but in the factory where they let him have that space, you know, but he had a little area where he had his computer and a lot of stuff on like a desk kind of in the back. And I walk in and he said, I want to ask you a question, some questions. I said, yeah, sure. And he pulls out these printed stacks of like forum conversations that he like print screen, and you know, stacked them up. And a lot of it was dialogue from Mike, and he was asking me questions like, hey, and they were highlighted. It was like he's like, hey, Mike was is talking here about doing this process or this process, and he's like, what did he mean by that? You know, and I'm like,
Uh,
well, I don't know what he meant. I'm not.
yeah.
I mean, I'm not the guy, you know,
Yeah.
and so, but you know, I think part of it was maybe I don't want to say lost in translation, literally. I mean, Roberto's English was great, but I think that some of it was that like what did he actually mean by this, and also some
Yeah.
of it was why was he doing this, you know,
Yeah.
and I don't know that he, I mean, sometimes I got the feeling that he maybe was like that, like maybe this some of this stuff doesn't need to be out there, but then there was also this thing. It reminded me again. We're talking about Paul Francis too. Both in some ways, there was a part of Roberto that was like when I've been around Paul, Paul always reminds me of and I say this respectfully, like a kid, like the curiosity of a
Mhm.
kid. Like he does,
Yeah.
it doesn't die. There's no dying flame of the curiosity. And
Yeah.
Roberto was the same way, man. Like he just he just like bled the curiosity and the creativity. And so when he would read these other things, it was more of like,
Yeah.
I okay, so you could just see the wheel spinning, you know, and
Yeah. With symbol making too, though, there because there's no like A, B, C, D. There's no step by step in how to do it. There's
right,
infinite different methods, and you could create your own technique. And so, even someone as experienced as a Roberto or as a Paul Francis, like there's
yeah,
still going to be something that they don't know, or like
oh yeah,
a different angle, a different way of viewing the material and how to work it that they don't know. And so, it is like, that's why I've never understood um, that kind of bravado in the symbol
mhm.
making industry when you come out and you're like, I know what I'm doing. Like I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing. I'm like on this journey of discovering, and it's like music. I'll never actually reach the end of.
There's no end.
There's no end to it. So it's like you
Right.
can kind of, that curious mentality, if I feel like, can take you really far, because you're always going to learn. If you kind of get to a point where you feel like you've mastered it or you've gotten to a certain place, then you stop learning. That's fine. You might be really good where you're at, but you're not going to keep evolving.
Yeah, and I think Mike, you know, he used to say that too. He to, you know, circle it back around to him when he would always contribute. It's funny. Well, several things that he told me. Like I remember there were a lot of opinions that would float around when he would post a lot of stuff, right, and a lot of information. Even as knowledgeable as he was and as pointed and direct as he was, there were a lot of naysayers. You know, I'm talking like people who don't make symbols. I mean, just people who would just
Mhm.
they just type stuff, you know, just a
Yeah.
armchair warrior kind of thing, and they would quickly be shut down. But you know, it's funny. He never his demeanor, man. Like he always had this. It wasn't just an air of confidence of like authority or whatever. I mean, he had it, but he didn't. He could always counter with the information that no one could. You know, he just knew what he was talking about.
Mhm. Yeah.
And but he never said like, I know what I'm talking about. He could just counter everything. And it wouldn't just be about like what he was doing. This is other thing. Most of what he would post would be his thoughts on, you know, somebody likes a certain line of symbols from some big company or whatever. And he would, if he liked those two, or if he didn't, he was just like another community member. He would chime in and say, yeah, I don't know. I feel like these are these are kind of limited, you know, or these are
Yeah.
really great. I think these have a great sonic range, and I just love the profile of the, you know, same nerdy stuff that we all
Yeah.
talk about. And I think the big picture was there was a lot of stuff where, you know, some life wisdom stuff that started to come into play the more he and I started to talk, like offline,
Yeah.
where symbol making, and also I should say, Roberto did this too. What I realized is when I visited him, and the time that I was communicating with Mike, even before going to visit him in his workshop, he it quickly became the people, like their life. And Mike was like you know, our age, he was older than me, but he kind of was uh, like that cool uncle, you know, or an older brother who was, extremely wise. And like, so everything, while he would impart all this knowledge about symbol making and the sounds I was hearing, you know, and even the things that like my musical mentors would talk about, and he could help clarify why those things were like that in terms of
Mm.
sound. And it was a really great piece of the puzzle, but he always coupled it with all this like really beautiful life advice, you know, and it may be situational from what we were talking about, or it could just be almost like like, you know, a great sage delivering this riddle. And
Mm.
then, you know, I'm just now realizing what he was talking about. I go,
Wow.
wow,
Yeah.
you know, just really, really heavy stuff. And, you know, but it'd be little things like, you know, when I would have tough days running the forums or something, it'd be something straight ahead. But he would say, like, man, you know, just remember that silence will take care of all of it.
Mm. Whew. Wow.
And that helped me a lot. You
Wow.
know, and I think about that now, however many years later this is, you know, almost not close to me. It's 30, almost, you know, not 30 yet, but it's been a while. And that those kinds of things are
Wow.
there. And there were a lot of things in life that he did that people don't know about. Like, I remember at one point he took up running, and I did too later. Like, it was not the same time, but I remember I used to joke with him about it. Like, you know, you want to do that, and he got into like running these, you know, half marathons and then longer, you know, and it just. But he was driven by that mental thing,
Mhm.
and the lessons that he gave me just talking about that stuff. Of course, I didn't plug it in at that moment about how that tied in with his own craft and his focus towards symbol making, and that, like you said, it's a constant journey. It's not the I ran a half marathon. It's I went through the mental
Mhm.
push to work through these things to get to this thing, you know. And so
Yeah.
he just, man, you know, in a lot of ways he was like a pillar like that. And
Mm.
so anyway, all that to say, I'm putting that out there because a lot of people don't know that about him. And when I went to
Yeah.
visit him, it was only solidified. I mean, from the moment that I spoke to him on the phone when I got to New Jersey where he lived, and then I went to his house, and his wife and daughter were very accepting. I remember eating dinner at their house, and they had these dogs. I can't remember if they were great Pyrenees or what, the big, large white dogs, and
Mm. Yeah.
they I mean, they knew everything about them, and they were trained, and they were just these beautiful animals. And you know, everything, even in the house, like some of the furniture and just certain things were built by Mike, because Mike just had that. He was like an engineer in that way. I mean, he could just produce and could see things in forms and build stuff. And so, you know, to paint that picture is important because he was meticulous about his craft and about craft of other things, and everything he did, there was like a system and order. You know, even going down to his shop, it was like the way things were set up, the way his lathe was set up, of course, you know, was, I mean, safety first for sure. And he's showing me how, like, man, if before I had this, there were pieces flying all over the room, you know, like when I'm lathing, and you know, I'm talking about, Tim, like, piece comes
Yeah.
off and it's ricochet, it's bouncing around the room, you know, and you're like, well, that could
Yeah.
be in my neck or
Yeah.
something, and I'm
Right.
out. That's it, gone.
Right.
And so, you know, even being in there, it was like, you know, put these goggles on, you know,
Yeah.
and do these things, because this is not a joke. And So, that's just how he was. And if you read the writings that are still floating around out there, you can see that personality even in how he, I mean, if there's any holes in it, it's my fault, not his. It's because I did not preserve all of it. And what's out there was just pieces.
Mm.
But he was like, I mean, it would be like he would send me something, and if there was any discrepancy or anything wrong, and he figured it out within a few minutes or even a day later, it was an immediate, I'm going to find you and we're going to correct this now. Like,
Yeah. Edit
this
this part. I need
information
to
is,
add this
yeah,
or change this. Yeah.
yep,
Wow. Yeah.
yes, yes. And
How
I
do you
understand.
how do you feel like that translated to the work itself? Like, what I haven't had a
Oh,
chance to play many of his cymbals, but like,
yep.
I'm interested to know like that type of mentality. How did that like? What kind of work was he producing?
Well, it's funny because if you think on one hand, like if someone were to think that way, in a craft where you have to, I think, and I have not ever hammered, well, actually I have hammered a cymbal, fatally, but I haven't done what you guys do. Okay. So I'm just going to frame that up, but I will say this, just being around those guys, it seems like there's a beautiful, balance in the people who are really, really great at this, and the ability to be that way, which is super methodical and very
Mm.
process oriented, and B, completely opposite that.
Yes.
Like, and
Yes.
I don't know how you do, it's just this, it's like if you can exist in this plane that's kind of zen like in between both of those. I mean, roll
Yes.
your eyes, I don't know, but that balance, I think, or even that imbalance between the two, is
Yeah.
part of what adds the longevity and the creativity of new things happening and new
Yeah,
discoveries.
yeah, yeah. Then there's a John Coltrane quote about how he's saying like you have to know all of the scales and all of the
Yeah,
nodes. You have to know all of it like forward and backward in every key so that you can stand on the bandstand and just forget all of
forget
it.
about it. Yeah,
And
right.
that to me is like my goal too. It's like if I could be super OCD and anal about like processes and all that kind of stuff when I'm not actually sitting at an anvil. But when I sit at
Mhm.
the anvil, if I have all that stuff in my mind, then I get in my own way and I start like trying to force the material into what I want it to be. And obviously, I mean, like there's like a balance here because obviously I am swinging the hammer with some intention
Oh,
of
yeah.
what but if I come at it with this really rigid, like I'm gonna make this blank a 20-inch that weighs 1,801 grams and it's going to have this type of shape and it's going to sound exactly like this and it's going to have this kind of bell. If I do that from the very beginning, then it ruins the entire process because you discover things even in the midst of hammering one blank that takes you in different directions than you're originally intending. And so you kind of have your intention, but then you have this looseness and this go with the flow nature to kind of change at the drop of a hat because you might swing the hammer once and then see the metal kind of respond in a way that was
Yeah.
unexpected. And so you kind of have to go with that and see, okay, well,
It's a
what now I'm going to,
conversation.
it's a conversation. Exactly. So in a way, it is a lot like music and improvised music, I would say, like
Yeah, you're
the
right.
kind of, yeah. So,
And Mike was, I mean, again, like you're talking about how that might affect his work. And I saw, um, I mean, he went through a lot of the steps that, at least what I saw in his postings, in his contributions, in visiting him, those, in that kind of, perspective or my filter, what I saw in his work was, going from being the guy who modified cymbals, and this because you did the same thing.
yeah.
It's like, and um, to eventually being able to source, because this wasn't really as much of
Yeah.
a thing back then, being able to source the bronze and then make, kind of backing up the process and kind of getting in at an earlier stage and having more control. It was really wild to watch that and how that affected his work. And I think, to try to answer your question, the at, Mike, a lot of his modifications, like I think he understood enough and knew a lot about the sounds and the different kinds of sounds that people were asking for and wanting. He was also learning and growing too, and discovering how to dial those things in. I think he had done a lot of that exploration before we ever kind of
Mm,
met, and before he started to document anything or send anything. But I'd like to say respectfully that I think the process of working with a lot more voices and a lot of other people, like he was challenged to kind of keep
mm,
reaching for some of that stuff. And so
yeah.
I saw, I don't want to speak a lot to his modifications because his modifications weren't his whole voice. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
you know, I heard more of his voice when he started using the blanks, but the the mods though, the thing that was interesting about that where there were things like he wouldn't do. Like I think he may have done it a few times. But he wouldn't mess with vintage cymbals much, if at
Hmm.
all. In fact, eventually became where he just wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Unless it was like he knew you really well, or he didn't want to advertise that. He didn't really want to do that. Um, but he also would tell you why. Like it wasn't just the I don't want to ruin vintage cymbals. It was there are some kind of physical property. There are things in vintage. So there's the crust is different than it was when it was new, you know,
Yeah.
and what's inside of that, you know, is going to be chemically different. And there are some things that, you know, we can't guarantee what's happening under there. And when it gets older, you know, and these are things we didn't know. And so we're hearing this stuff. I'm like, God, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And what in the world? That created this whole like thing. So modifications were this big field of exploration and customization that was new. And he did have a voice in that. I mean, he definitely could, you know, the fact that he could alter stuff and understand and kind of guide the control of it was massive. But man, when those blanks started hitting, he was using like I remember we used to go buy up all of the Sabian AA raw cymbals that were out there because they were the
Yes.
ones that weren't, you know, they were shaped, but that's all they
They're
were.
hydraulically pressed.
They're pressed, yeah.
They have no hammering.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it was like, oh man, all right, send Mike those because he can do his magic, and he did. I had a whole set of those things. They were great, but
Yeah.
you know, but even that bronze has a characteristic that you can edit a lot, but it's still in the heart. And
Yeah.
so some of the bronze that was from Turkey that he was getting, you know, at that point, and some other sources. He, it was interesting because I felt like his cymbals, you know, like he wasn't just coming from he respected the jazz tradition and knew about the desire for the old sound, right?
Yeah.
Whatever letter goes in front of it, it didn't matter, and he knew those symbols, but he was interested in more of like, you know, what does the artist want, and if they wanted that, he'd have that discussion with them,
Hmm.
which is not this isn't uncommon for you guys. I hear this in y'all's
Hmm.
podcast all the time,
Yeah.
but he was one of those early guys to like put it out there also that like, hey, I'm not just going to give you a replica of this. I might be able to get close to it, but I want to find out what it is you really think that you know and like about that sound,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and let's see how. And it was like an interview process, you know,
Yeah.
at least at one point. I don't know if he was always like that, and people who could chime in here probably had more of that kind of side of experience with him. But I remember him telling me like, this is how I want to approach it. And when he and I worked together on some things, it was like, um, you know, he would put the hand up a lot of times and go, man, do you really understand though what it is that you're hearing?
Mm.
And I would say, yeah, sure I do. It's this, and this. He goes, right, but it's also this, and this.
Mm.
You know, and that's cool. But for what you told me you want though, when you
Yeah.
play,
Yeah.
is is
There's
this. So
something's missing. Yeah.
there's a missing piece, right? And
Yeah.
that would be it could be things like, you know, everything down to profile, weight, all the stuff that you know.
Yeah.
One thing he did was I felt like a lot of his symbols that he liked that he made uh, did have a lot of controlled sound to them. They weren't all just fire breathing dragons that, you know,
Yeah.
people are into that, which is great. But his sound, like a lot of his cymbals, I remember he sent me a crate full, not a crate full, but a box full of like maybe 10 cymbals one time, and just to try them out and send them back. And by the way, he was very like kind of like big brother, big uncle, like you better not mess these cymbals up, you know, like when
Yeah.
you send them back, they're insured for this amount, and I have an inventory sheet, and you need to sign the inventory sheet. I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't because it was Chad, it was because it was
Yeah.
this is how I operate. You're on my
Yeah.
turf now, you know.
Right. Right.
And that's he was very very clear about those things, and I loved it. It was, of course, it made it great, but you know, when I pulled those out of the box, I remember playing through them, and it was like I wasn't grown up enough yet to understand. I
Ah,
played them. I was like, I don't know, some of these are just sort of vanilla to me. And
mm,
and please understand, I am putting myself under a hell of a foot saying this, because this wasn't like I didn't like them. I just didn't understand. These weren't ones that he made for me. I want to be clear. These are just some that he had made that he wanted me to give him some feedback on and wanted
yeah,
me to play. And if I wanted to buy one, I could, but it, it was it was kind of a between him and me sort of a thing. And I know he probably
yeah,
did this with some other people, but when I played some of them, the first thing I wasn't used to was he kind of helped birth the the idea that, wait, I actually like heavier cymbals.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I already knew that the infamous Tony cymbal, the ones that we all love, that it wasn't light, 25, 2,600 gram plus 22, and it was, or not even quite 22, all the things we know now. But it wasn't these paper thin wispy things. It was like
yeah.
but for me, I found out that a lot of the drummers that I really liked had that thing. Well, I didn't know that. So I get this box and I have these cymbals, and they're like, I flip them over, and the gram weight on a 22 is like 2,700 grams. And I didn't even play it. I'm like, that's really heavy. And I put it over, and I flip the next one over. It's like 2,800 grams. What is Mike doing? Flip it over. I'm looking for like the 2,200 gram one at that point,
Yeah,
or less.
yeah,
I didn't know, and I didn't even hit them. I just put them to the side. And then I realized they were all like that. And I'm like, okay. So I put them on the stand. And, at first I was like, this is pretty controlled. It seems, where's the fire?
yeah,
Where's the grit? Where's all the
yeah,
funky stuff that I'm looking for? And those particular cymbals, Mike wasn't making them for that kind of sound.
yeah,
And I didn't know that. Like, he didn't tell me any, like, hey, this is what these are for. It was like, I'm going to send you these and give me your feedback kind of stuff. And I'm like, well,
yep,
I'm expecting, so my perspective is here. He's made these things over here. And I'm saying it all this way to set it up to say that, again, for me, just like with everything with Mike, he was trying to teach me stuff. And it was, I'm sure that's not why he sent me those. I know it wasn't. That's very presumptive. That's like
yeah, yeah,
ego saying that. I'm just saying that it was a learning moment for me, because of course, when I sat with him for about a week, I started to realize that the qualities that I was looking for were in about half of those cymbals. I just
mm,
couldn't hear it, and I didn't know how to play them. And it was one more lesson, which I had already gotten from some people, but didn't listen to. And that was, you kind of need to learn the instrument, because it's like a personality. It's like a
yeah,
person. You need to just, you got to give it a chance. And then I put it with the music, which is another thing that I kind of learned from him too. Is like, it sounds great in a little controlled room where it's pretty, but you need to get that thing with some instruments on the bandstand in about 3 different rooms and see what happens. And if you
yes,
can, hear it from out front, let somebody else tap it beforehand or something, and just hear it,
yeah,
because what you think it is not. So, that's a weird answer to your question. It's not an answer. The thing was, Mike could make all kinds of stuff. I have a cymbal over here that is one that the Cymbalholic community knows. I've kept it forever because it's one that he stamped my son's name into it when my son was born, because he made it almost to the day that my son was born and didn't realize it until later.
wow,
And he
wow,
gave it to me to give to my son. He said, you can never sell this, and it's not yours. And it's one of my most favorite cymbals I've ever made.
wow,
And I
whoa,
have it. It's right over here. And I said, yeah, you got it, Mike. I got it. It's here. It's still here. And it is. It's one, and it actually has a lot of it's an 18, but it has a lot of that. I mean, it has a lot of wild tones in it. Most people probably would be scared of it because it is brash, and it is like the Nefertiti symbol in an 18.
woo,
And
yeah,
it's stiff though. It's very crispy. It's really stiff. And it's aged really well. He told me, he goes, watch, in about 10 years, he's like, I want you to play that thing on every gig and get it nasty. Don't put rivets in, don't edit it. It's just, let it become what it is, and then give it to Max if he plays drums. That's my son. And if he doesn't, that's fine. It's still his, it's not yours. and he's not with us anymore. Mike isn't,
Yeah.
but I know, I feel like he's still watching, like,
Yeah.
you got it. And I use it. I still use it. I've used it on recordings, whatever, but it's not one that I feel like is the kind of the mic sound sort of, which is usually a little bit more on a lot of things that I've heard that I feel like were more in his lane were had more warmth than overall brash, harsh trashness,
Yeah.
and more control, and the weight was, a little bit up, but they never played heavy. I should let me
Yeah.
get that in there too. You know how it is, and but a
Yeah.
lot of guys don't know this, that just because it weighs 2,800 grams on a 22 doesn't mean you're gonna, crack a stick on the thing, and it's not gonna
Yeah.
feel like you're hitting a brick wall. I mean, those cymbals would be lush, man.
Right.
Like the feel under the stick. Like, how is this so? It was the first time I'd ever experienced that. Like, this does not
Yeah.
match what's supposed to be happening here. The sound, the feel, none of this matches. And he laughed. He would laugh. I would like get on the phone, like, Mike, what is this? And he just kind of, quiet laugh, and then get real serious again. He's like, well, it's because this is what I did, and here are the things that I did. And if you want it to be more this way, we can do that, if you want that. But
Yeah.
that it's not gonna it's not gonna do what you think it's gonna do if it's like this. And he's
Right.
like, give it a chance, try this out, and you'll see. And so, it was just, it's hard to say what his sound was in some regards, because even after his death, I've had friends who, wonderful friends who were Cymbalholics, who had a lot of his work, sometimes even over COVID, especially, would send me um, some pieces just to play, and just to, we all had that love for him, for Mike as a person, not just a cymbal, like as a person, as a community member. And it was really beautiful to pull those instruments out after some time and play those. And
Yeah.
they were different, but there's something Mike about it. It's like the way it feels under a stick, and kind of the control, not just like, when you say control, sometimes that can sound like maybe the sustain isn't there, or it's a
Mm.
real, or the frequencies are like this. And I wouldn't say that was always the case. It was just, there was a kind of a heavy warmth to a lot of his work.
Yeah. I mean, that shows me like a deep level of understanding of the instrument. Cause I think, I kind of went through that same process of like, I'm the modification guy. And I never,
Yeah.
never thought I was going to I never thought I was going to make a original cymbal. I thought I was going to make maybe one or two just for myself, but I never
Yeah.
thought I would be capable of actually like start to finish making cymbals. And so I was like, I threw myself into modifying. I modified like, I don't know, probably hundreds of cymbals before I ever even touched a blank.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's something about like when I was there, when I was in that early stage, all I did was shave everything super paper thin, hammer it up super tall, and then get this like umbrella, growly, fire
Which is
breathing
cool. That's
dragon,
cool though, right? I mean,
which
that's
can
part of the
be cool.
process. It's part of the
Yes,
process, and you see what not to do real fast when you do
right.
that,
And what you're doing too
or
is
what you can do.
you're listening to the records that you love and the
Right, right.
sounds, and you're hearing this beautiful fire breathing dragon, and you're going, okay, I know how to get that. But
Hmm.
you're not at that point, you're not mature enough to realize that you actually have to think past what you're even hearing. Because when you're sitting behind, you're sitting behind a cymbal, you hear one thing, like there's so much more than just what you're hearing, and there's
Right.
how it translates. And so being able to train yourself and get an ear to be able to know, like you're saying with Mike, is like he knew all of the other factors that you as the drummer, you're just paying attention to what's happening, and he's kind of bringing this awareness to like there's a broader perspective that when you start to get hip to that, your ear starts to change, and you start to then
Yeah.
prefer those kind of heavier weights. It doesn't mean that you don't ever go super paper thin or umbrella
Right.
shaped or crazy.
Right.
But I've started to see that is actually like it's a weird thing to say, like, because I know what you mean when you say like I've hit them and they were kind of vanilla. I just felt like they were vanilla
At first. Yeah.
at first, and then it's like you get to know them, and then your ear develops. You get more maturity in your ears, and then you start to realize like that vanilla thing that you thought was vanilla is actually like the hippest, deepest thing. That's the Tony Williams Nefertiti. That's the you know, all that's the Jack DeJohnette sound when he's playing with like,
Yeah.
with Keith Carlock. It's like, it's all the stuff that like we don't really realize. And I think too, it's like I don't know, as cymbal makers, it's kind of, it can feel easier to make a heavy cymbal because
Mm,
like a lot of like issues in the balance of the tension get hidden by just the mass. Like it has so much mass that it's going to have stick definition. You're not going to hear that hum as much as when
right.
you save it 500 grams thinner, you're going to, all of a sudden, all of it's going to come out.
Right.
And so it almost feels like more of a challenge. Like if you can make a really good sounding, super paper thin cymbal, that's like the ultimate cymbal you can make. But then I'm coming to that place of like flipping that on its head of realizing like being able to make a heavy cymbal that responds and feels like it's light is the holy grail to me. It's like
Because they were
because
like butter, dude. His cymbals were to
yeah
be like, but you're like, what? And I think, man, you're gonna roll your eyes. Everybody who's ever hearing any of this in the future, whenever, are gonna be like, Chad is out of his, this is some corny stuff. But Mike, that whole thing was kind of like the way Mike was. It was like it was his quiet way of letting you learn. It was like
mm,
and it was almost like the whole be patient young man kind of thing, because he seemed, I don't know, and I feel like I knew him enough personally, but I don't know him enough personally like on a day-to-day basis to know if he was like this. But it was like he had an incredible patience with tenseness at the same time. And his
mm,
cymbals did too. And that sounds super cheesy to say, but I mean it really respectfully. It's like his cymbals had that, like you have to stay with them for a minute,
yeah
and then you start to find out things. And Mike would try to encourage me even to do that just with life stuff. Like when I would start to do something, it had nothing to do with cymbals or anything else. And I would send him these long messages of frustration, just like a therapy dump, on this guy. And Mike was like, he always listened, and he always would give me these really pointed, uh, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but
yeah
this this is what you might want to, this is how I might approach this, or this might be the way. And it would always be right, and it
yeah
wouldn't always be what I wanted to hear. And it's the same way with the cymbals. It was like, but I want this. He's like, yeah, yep. But you know, I think what you should do
yeah
is try, I'm gonna send you this and try this for a while and try with these different sticks, and the sound is in it, but you can pull it out. And the other thing that he would do too, if I back up just again, I know is going on for a long time, Tim, but he, before anybody had done this, he was also in the conversations with everyone individually in the forum, uh, posts and threads and topics and all of that, and in his own writings. He was addressing all the things like, like, community came up with this term like the barking seal. That was a Cymbalholic thing. Like, we use
yeah
that and all these terms, and not to mention all the I don't want to get into all that. Cymbalholic, just the community came up with all this stuff because no
yeah
one was doing it. No one was talking about that stuff. The nerdy things. Why does this sound like this when you play up near the bridge of it? It sounds terrible on some cymbals, and cymbals crack there. And he was kind of the guy who was willing to share enough of what he knew that would step up and say, well, this is because where this is what's going on in that part of the cymbal, and this is what's happening at this part of the cymbal. And if you have a cup or a bell that's kind of hammered this way or shaped this way, like we didn't know any of that stuff. And or the taper of it from the bell to the edge of the cymbal, not just the profile, but the taper, like how thick the metal is through there. And I mean, I remember sending him pieces, showing him pieces of some cymbals that I had gotten from Roberto that were experiments that I wasn't supposed to have. And that's another long story. He didn't mean for me to get those. And, they exploded while I was playing on them. I mean, these things happen. And he was, of course, super sorry about that. And I mean, he squared it away. And I was never, but I didn't know why. And I was like curious. I wasn't mad. I was like, whoa, why did that happen? That was super cool. It also looked really cool on my gig when my cymbal
Yeah.
exploded. I'm like, yeah, man, yeah. But you know, you know, Mike was even looking at that years later, and I say years later, but some years later, and it was like, oh, that's interesting when you look at the kind of
Cross section. Yeah.
thank you, cross section of the
Yeah.
bronze, yeah, and he's like, oh, it's just it, and he probably treated it like this, or this may have
Yeah.
had a, you know, and he was very respectful too. Like he wouldn't, there were some things that, like, he knew Roberto was very secret about some stuff, and so he would never get on the forum and like speculate, oh, I think Roberto's doing this, or he definitely stayed in his
Yeah.
lane, man, and he was super super cool and very respectful. Um, but you know, there were a few times where we would have private conversations, and he would say, I think what he didn't want you to see might have been, he may have been, you know, doing this process or doing this, and actually I'm setting up a tank to experiment with some of these processes and see what happens when I, you know, how brittle it gets, or, you know, because I know what he was doing.
Yeah.
And you know, because Mike had that, like, I don't forgotten his background now, and I hope if his family's watching this, I mean no disrespect by any misinformation, because I don't want to do that, but I seem like in the sciences in particular, like in engineering or chemistry, or I've forgotten what his background was in, but he was very knowledgeable in these areas, and so he was bringing a lot of science to it,
Mm.
and that's where a lot of people, when they would just throw out these kind of loose, well, symbols feel like this, and they are supposed to be like this and like that, you know, and he could counter it with a lot of factual scientific stuff that people
Yeah.
weren't kind of communicating about that time. And then of course,
Yeah.
man, you got to think of who came after that, or at the same time. You had, like, I mean, not in any particular order, but you had the infamous Johann, who was making stuff, and I've been contacted recently to speak a little bit about him, but we didn't have much communication, and I didn't really know his family or him very well. I had some of his work, and he should not be overshadowed, in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that he wrote a lot of stuff that also got lost and contributed kind of co-jointly in some ways with Mike on a lot of discoveries that then you had Matt Bettis and Matt Nolan, and Craig was on there. Man,
Yeah.
Craig came on board and started lighting fires, man.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, I mean, when Craig hit, by the time he,
The controversial
oh, the
ride.
K controversy, man, I mean, wrecked shop with that stuff. And you know, and Craig is great anyway, because Craig has that, like, I mean, he's such a soulful cat, man, but I also love his, he's got fire, man. So you know, he and Matt Bettis too would come in and just be like, "You ready to go?" You
Yeah,
know,
let's go.
not
Yeah.
really, but you know, it was kind of, they had a beautiful energy about and respect for the craft, and experimentation, like the spirit of the craft of discovery and trying all kinds of things, and still do, you know. I know
Yeah.
Bettis, I don't know if Bettis is even back to doing or making much, but man, always was in the tank of, like, man, he was coming up with I'm like, what is that thing? And Nolan, a lot of these guys were, I mean, I could go on. I'm leaving out like 1,000 names of these guys who were,
Yeah.
they were like burbling right under the surface. And Mike was at that time was kind of like really driving and maybe Johan too, we're kind of driving the information system on the front end.
Yeah.
And these other guys were like, oh, we're doing it too, and we're trying these things out. And you know, like, even when Mike was talking about, like, he would post stuff about how to set up a lathe, man, there was no instruction about that stuff, like at
Yeah.
home for cymbal making, right? And he was, you know, like, if you post this, you have to put your safety messages on the front of this thing, because, you know, we don't want legal situations to have, I don't want people's safety to be jeopardized. And
Yeah.
he was like super, like, he would even scold some of those guys I just mentioned when they would post their setups. And he's like, man, you need to secure that to the foundation of your house. Like, you need to, like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, what, like, do not play with that, man, because this could be serious. Like,
Yeah, if anyone were to, if I had documented my very first lathe, I mean, it was like, it was the dumbest. most dangerous possible thing ever. And
Oh
it was
man.
great. I mean, it was just a wood lathe that I had no clue. I hadn't done the research to realize like you need to pull that RPM way down. And so
Yeah, yeah.
I turned that wood lathe on at 1750 RPMs on this
Mm.
rickety cart that was kind of bouncing up and down. And it starts bouncing. And then my buddy, kind of my employee at the time, just jumped on the cart to try to like batten it down. And then I
Oh
come
my
out
God, Tim.
like, and just, I mean, I have a lot of stories of like, I could have literally killed myself many
Well, I
times.
mean, and that's what I think that's what was so nice about someone like Mike, who not only cared about that, but realized if I'm going to put this out there and people are leaning into what I've been saying, I've got to cover my tracks. And
Yeah.
he cared about everybody learning and
Right.
doing the thing the right way. And I can't imagine what it would be like if all of that had hit at the time where we have the tech we have now to document things,
Man. Yeah.
because and my
I
big
mean,
regret is that we don't have the site still. Like once
yeah.
from 2019, especially, even before that, but like I wish I could have leaned back into all of this and kept it really fired up. And then my goal at one point was literally to make it more of an independent cymbal-smith haven,
Mm,
when all of those guys started to hit, and I was like, man, let's just go with this.
yeah.
But it
Right.
wasn't mine, it was the community. I mean, I ran
Yeah.
it, but the
Right.
community, it's their voice. So it's its own animal.
It becomes its own thing. Yeah. And people kind of, yeah.
Fast,
Well,
fast.
and I would also say too, like, I mean, even though that information is not still around, there's bits and pieces of it, obviously, but like
Right.
that, there's still like something that put in the air, to where like, I mean, I don't, like I said at the beginning, I don't know that I would be doing this, it's not even that I was like I wasn't super tapped into to the forum. I was kind of
Yeah.
like on the periphery a little bit. And I found out about it via someone who was on the forum, or learning about Roberto. And so even like I'm on the outer orbit of this whole Cymbalholic thing, but it still had enough force and enough
Yeah.
draw to
Yeah.
pull me into this craft. And then now we have like a huge surge in like new guys starting it, and it's just becoming more and more possible because information, like you said, like the social media
Right.
has allowed more information to be captured and accessible in a very easy way. And I know I'm doing some things that are helping it be more visible. And
Oh yeah.
I question all the time whether or not like should I be doing this, but it just feels like, I mean, to me, I love the old cymbals. I love the fact, I love those cymbals. I have quite a few of them.
Yeah.
I love them. I also want us to kind of like not move past it, but just like allow there to be something new, like allow us to come into some kind of new territory with it, being informed. It's like music or anything, like be
Right.
informed by the past, respect the past, give it the credit it deserves, but don't lock yourself there and say,
Yeah.
it'd be like saying like there's never been any good music made after 1960. It's like that's just an absurd statement. Yes, we
Yeah.
have seen pop music kind of do its thing and go off in some weird
Yeah, of course.
zone, and you could definitely make an argument for the degradation of our of culture and of
Yeah.
music in some
Yeah.
sense.
Right. Sure.
But to say something like, well, there's never been anything, there's never been a good cymbal made after 1977 when the K factory closed down. It's just
Not
I
right.
find that to be silly. Yeah. But yeah, I just want to like, from me to you, thank you for what you did with the Cymbalholic factory,
Oh man.
foundry.
It felt like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right.
That's
The
right.
foundry,
Yeah, sure, man.
the online
Yeah.
foundry. Thank you for doing that and for being a like the facilitator for all this information, because
Yeah.
I'm now in this. It's just cool. Everything kind of loops around on itself. Like I get this project from Adam. It's the first time I've actually ever held work that Mike has done. I'm checking out the shape, and it's obviously like it's just the initial shaping of a blank. It's just a
Yeah.
low shaped
Right.
hi-hat blank, real heavy, ready to be taken to the lathe and finished. And it just kind of it's had me kind of go down this trail, and like, like any art, you want to like, for me, I want to understand where it came from, who
Right.
it came from, what's the context of, because that will inform me, and it might change my mind on something that I'm doing that I'm like, I don't really want to do it that way. Like, how can I approach this modification of Mike's work in a way that honors like what he would have done? Like, obviously, I want to put my own stamp on it because I'm the one doing the work, but could I pay homage to him in some way? So make a symbol that, like, that's like inspired by like his work as someone that I respect. It's like things like that. And I think that's the kind of thing when we kind of roll, when time rolls over on itself and we kind of go
Yeah.
back to the past and gather things as we're moving forward, then hopefully we can kind of develop a voice and kind of move the art form forward in some sense. So that's
Well,
my little spiel.
I think that's the way to approach it. I mean, Mike, uh, the sad part is there's not, I mean, he'd made a lot of symbols, but in the big picture of time, if you think about the number of years, especially like by the time that he was working for Blanks until he passed away, that's not a huge timeline of symbol making. I mean, it is, but it's not. You got to think there's not that much work of his out there
Hmm.
that you can just go kind of just grab some of Mike's work. I mean, it's
Right.
really, and people who know, and you're usually going to hold on. I mean, I've got one over here that I mean, he
It'll
told
never
me
leave.
that's
Yeah.
it. It's not, yeah, it's and also even if you did, it's it's only a piece of the puzzle, and you know how that
Hmm.
works. One symbol's not going to define a man, but I would say as you approach those, the only thing I could add to that is maybe think about the fact that he had a very, his personality, he was very focused, even in how he would respond to a question, or when he would make something, everything. I know we all have a purpose when we do this, and when you're searching, every hammer stroke, every reason every tool you use has a purpose. You've chosen that for a reason, but it's like it's almost like he was squeezing the blood out of the turnip on that one. Like he
Mm.
really, that's why I think a lot of his symbols have that kind of that depth. There's a heaviness to them, not just in weight, but in that sound. There's a warmth that never leaves. So
Mm.
if you're working on those symbols, they probably should retain that kind of heavy warmth and that
Yeah.
focus, because those are the adjectives that
Mm.
that's what he made. That was
Yeah.
his character,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know. So and at the same time, he would agree. I mean, he had the respect for the past, so much so that he quit modifying vintage symbols because he just didn't want to. It was like, they are what they are. I'll just make
Yeah.
something that is more like what you want, or whatever. And
Right.
again, that's a whole thing. I'm just saying that. I'm not getting into that. I'm just, that's what he would do. But it was, he was trying to find a different kind of sound too. And so was Roberto. Roberto loved,
Yeah.
I mean, man, when you went to his, when he had old 602 Pisces. He had a whole bunch of A's, K's. He had all kinds of stuff, and he was curious about all of it. And while the K's influenced him, he wasn't a one trick pony that way. I mean, he was
Right.
always trying to like merge. That's why his symbols, I think a lot of people bought and sold a lot of them back in the day because they were trying to get like a new old K sound.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
honestly, while it was from that vocabulary, I won't say everybody, but a lot of people just took for granted that, wait, this Roberto was an artist. Mike
Yeah.
was an artist too. Mike was like the deep scientist artist. That's
Mm.
what he was. You
All
had
right.
Roberto who was that way too, but Roberto was like wild man, like the
Yeah.
sorcerer, and personality, and this creative, beautiful human being, man. And Mike was that way, but Mike was like this like Zen scientist focused, just
Yeah.
the method man, and
That's interesting. I've had there's one of my buddies, his guitarist named Charlie. has a thing where he says, he talks about like ground players and air players. He talks about like,
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like,
yes,
so I just, that's what I just thought. I was like, Spitzkino's like the guy that's in the air.
yeah,
He's like the
man,
airplane. And then
yes.
like Mike's like the guy on the, he's the grounded, or, you know, obviously that has a connotation, but like it's like the
No, no,
earth.
no.
You know what I
I know
mean?
what I know totally. That,
And maybe even
yep,
one step further, maybe it's like deep sea is like even one step below
yes,
ground, you know, ground level
yes.
artist, you know.
No, that's pretty accurate, I would say. I would definitely
Yeah.
say that, man. But at the end of the day, these guys were so man, like y'all are, and that's what I was told Dave, and I've said it to Paul Francis too, and so many different instances with him, especially, is how I almost feel like I can't speak for a community, but even for me, as someone who doesn't make cymbals, just as someone who plays them and loves them, I was like, I never felt like I deserved to know all these things. And they
Mm,
were always so generous, especially then with a platform that was kind of new and no one really wanted to, what's going to happen with all this information. And I kind of screwed it up and lost all of it, but gosh, man, these guys were so generous with their time and their information and clarity and patience with the community so that whatever happened would probably be for the better. And then here you guys are,
mm.
as we're kind of, generationally away from that, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it. And I think, again, not to sound cheesy, but I think that some of those guys would be most in love with the fact that there is that experimentation and it's not one flavor of the month kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Right.
all of them cared about what, and I say this because we don't have Roberto anymore. We don't have Johan anymore. We don't have Mike anymore, and several other guys too that aren't with us anymore. But we have the Paul Francises. We
Mm.
have the Craigs
Yeah.
the you go
Matt
down the list, right?
Nolan,
Yeah, yeah.
Collingwood. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, man, there's so many. Again, we're not naming everybody, but
But they're like the bridge almost. They're like
they
a
are.
bridge that
And they
then
give
we're
the
here and then
information.
yeah.
They're not hiding it either. I'm sure that there's some stuff, but I mean, it's generally you're dealing with because of the culture, the technology, and I really think whether you want to contribute them or not, I think guys like Mike Skeba open that doorway. I mean, this is again, it sounds so cheesy, but had enough love for the music and the craft and the search that they gave back. I mean, that's a legacy, man. I mean,
Mm.
Mike had a broad legacy, but the main one that we know is his kindness and his patience and his ability to really clearly communicate hammering patterns that he discovered and how to set up a lathe and what lathing does and what he was discovering, not in an egotistical way, but like, here's what I'm finding out. And then that just set up a culture of sharing that information and not gatekeeping all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here you
And
go.
I'm
So
and I'm
don't thank
grateful.
me, thank him, man.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many people I could thank for that. And
Yeah.
yeah, just to be able to be a part of that lineage in a way is special. You know, it's really special.
And let me put one last asterisk on this is I, I don't know who they are, but I would love to acknowledge anyone who would ever be a family member of or a friend of or someone holding information or the person or the people who, let's just say, came before the Robertos and the Mikes and
Yeah, that we'll never
the
know.
that we won't know. And I mean,
Yeah.
even the guys that in the Turkish factories and all the way back in the China and Japan. I mean, like I'm like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I
Yeah.
mean, man, there's a lot of shoulders that are stood on to get us
Yeah.
where we are now, and it's crazy to think about where we are,
Yeah.
and so
It's humbling to think that like, you know, you tell a story of Mike and you hear like, oh, like I didn't really know he started out as only modifying and then moved into that in the same way that I kind of stumbled into it. But it's like I would imagine it's humbling to realize. I would imagine that when he did it, he probably had to do it for years
oh
and
no, he
years
had
and
been
years
doing
and
it.
years.
Oh yeah. No, he
You
had been
know,
doing it for a long time before we
right.
ever, yes.
And so
Yeah.
because of that, in some sense, because of that, like I'm able to come on the scene as some like snot-nosed kid and start modifying, and then like a couple of years later start making blanks. And then, it's
Hmm.
like and it's like I've been on this fast track. And it's like
Yeah.
to look back and realize before the age of the internet, this is kind of a benefit
Yeah.
of the social media side. So before that age, I would have never known. And if I had somehow even decided to do it, it would have been like 4 times longer for me to get where I'm at now, just because of
Oh
the
yeah.
state of the world. And so
Yeah.
what he kind of paved before me, even though I didn't know it, I didn't know it until this conversation, the stuff about the modifying first. It's like that's where we can be like super humbled and grateful for the fact that we, all of us new guys kind of in the indie cymbal making world. It's like we can be super we should be humbled and grateful that we have been able to be on a fast track to go from here to here in the span of a few short years, where people before us had to take a decade or
Yeah,
15
man.
years just to kind of,
Yes.
I mean, that's insane to think about.
All the broken cymbals, all of
Oh yeah.
and working with cymbals that were probably mostly from 70s and 80s, like, I
Yeah.
mean, they're not, and where do you get blanks? How do you even get blanks? And,
Yeah.
yeah, man, you're right. You're right. I mean, it's a product of technology and culture. And so
Yeah.
and now, but hey, I don't know that Mike would want the pressure. I mean, I know this is another thing too, when things started to escalate with requests and as the technology shifted and even before his passing, I mean, it was still picking up pace,
Yeah. Yeah.
as soon as the
Yeah.
iPhone hit and smartphones, and I mean that changed a lot. And so then it became, I don't, again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I always felt like there was a point where Mike wasn't all about like, let's ramp this thing up 1,000%. Like it was like, man, give me some space. And
Yeah.
I wonder, I wish, we don't know. I would love to know what he would be doing now.
Right. Yeah.
Because he could have been the kind of guy who would have been like, screw all this, I'm gonna raise these dogs, and get back
Yeah.
to my,
Yeah.
and just
Right. I'm
stay, just
done. It's
do my
too much
work or
heat.
retire and yeah, do the
Right.
thing. I mean, I don't think he was that kind of personality, but I know that he liked space too. He was
Yeah.
like, um, that was another thing. I mean, like, I talk a lot, so it was interesting to sit with him in person, in his where he made cymbals, and looking at stuff. And I look back and I think he said like maybe 19 words in the time I was there, and I'm like
Wow.
blah blah like a little dog,
Yeah.
and everything that he said was just so deep and so
Yeah.
heavy. He had a sense of humor too, but and a lot of love, man, a lot of love. You didn't think it. He kind of had a tough demeanor, like
Yeah.
on the he had that Jersey thing, he's just
Yeah.
kind of tough. But he, you always knew he had that loving, like that giving spirit, man.
Yeah.
And he would just tell, like, if you had a question, I'd ask finally, and he would just say, "Well, it's this,"
Mm.
and you're like, "Wow, okay." And he goes, and just before you'd say something else, he goes, "But it's because of this."
Mm.
And as soon as he starts unlocking that, you're like, poof.
Yeah. It starts blowing up. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like the matrix equations are floating around in
Yeah.
front of you.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So good luck with that, man.
Yeah.
Part of me goes, hey man, just leave him alone, man.
I
Tell Adam,
know.
screw this, leave him alone. But then, they're they are what they are, and if they were in progress then you guys work out what you work out, man. But
Yeah.
there's just not a lot of his stuff out there, man. It's like really, really hard to track that stuff down, and certainly to be able to buy it. Like
Right.
you just don't see it very much. And
Right.
he did, there, at least up to a point, he did stamp serial numbers in all of his cymbals.
Mm.
And if you find one that isn't, and it just has his like Sharpie marker written underneath, and it's definitely early,
Yeah.
or it's a modification. You can usually tell the mods because I know you guys can for sure, because you can kind of see landmarks in the
For
symbol
sure.
that he could have put them in there, but he definitely the some of the shape he might have changed, but you can sort of see like a core in some of that this probably came from a like an Aziljan or like a Sabian or something.
Right. Yeah.
But most anything that was like the Turkish bronze, a lot of that stuff was like he hand stamped. There was like the numbers in there that
Yeah,
I don't know
cool.
what they correlated to. I'm sure that somewhere
So someone
his
has
daughter
that.
probably has that. I don't know. I haven't talked to
Yeah.
her, unfortunately. I need to reach out and reconnect with her. But um, yeah, man. But man, we miss him like crazy, and I regret every day that I don't still have his stuff. Although we do somewhere we still have the old forum files. They're just at a point where I'm not sure that that stuff can be reinstalled on a
Mm,
server and rebuilt enough to access it because of the way that it was, the
yeah.
database and all the software, what it was that made it
Right.
to get to the information. But maybe if I can talk Patrice into doing it, my wife who helped run all that stuff. She was the tech brain behind all of it. I mean,
Nice.
no one
Yeah.
ever gives her credit ever. But just to put it on record, she's the one who, I'm not just being nice to my wife. She is the one who technically made it happen. I knew what it needed to be. She made it happen.
That's
So
amazing. I think
we'll
that would
try to
be,
get it back, one day
yeah, that would
maybe.
be something interesting to kind of put out to anybody listening. Like if you have information, if you have information, have any of the stuff that he posted
Yep.
somehow, if you like copied and pasted stuff, like reach out to Chad, reach out to me,
Yep.
drop a comment below, like let's add to this and like kind of, yeah, bring him into the spotlight for a moment just to kind of like give him his due.
Yeah, man.
And then also too, I don't know anything about tech, but like maybe there's someone out there that's got programs that are able to kind of get in there and dig through
Oh
like
yeah.
old stuff and kind of digitize it in a fresh way. Like anyone that's a cymbal enthusiast and somehow knows that stuff too, it's like, reach out to Chad. It could be awesome.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much for your time in this. And like,
Thanks,
I've
man.
been wanting to connect with you for a while, and this little thing about Mike's hats kind of gave me the perfect opportunity to reach out.
I love it, man. I'm glad to talk to you finally, and I'm really, 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 again, I mean, man, it just is fitting because Mike was a really good friend. He was way kinder to me than I ever deserved.
Mm,
Just on a personal level, man. He really gave me a lot of really beautiful life advice. And a lot of people just don't do that anymore,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he was again, I know it's cheesy, I'll end with this, but when you're working on those, man, you gotta keep that spirit of him in mind, that he had that kind of heart, and
mm,
that can't leave. I don't know what that means. That
yeah,
has to be part of the process too, man, because that's just
yeah,
really, it's not just respect. That's just the person that he was, and
right, yeah,
so I'm just glad to be, thank you for letting me speak on him, and with respect to his family, they certainly would have a better, a better point of view, but we had a special relationship, man. And I'll go to my grave thankful for that one for sure. And thanks
yeah.
for letting me talk about it, man.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely will. I've already got stuff going in my mind of how to approach it. That would be kind of like an homage to him. So we'll see how
Yeah,
that
cool.
turns out. And whenever this gets posted and whenever that video gets posted, we'll see how well I do if I can live up to the live up to the
No
greatness.
pressure.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome, man.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you guys for listening. This has been the Reverie Podcast. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.